Imagine the most powerful man in the world, suddenly seized by fits of madness, speaking for days without stopping, conversing with the dead, and foaming at the mouth, while his doctors secretly poison him with arsenic and restraints. The King of England stripped naked, bound in a straitjacket, and beaten into submission by his own physicians. Was King George III truly insane or the victim of history's most successful medical conspiracy to seize a throne? Welcome back to Crimes of the Crown, where we explore the darkest secrets hiding behind royal portraits. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a tale that makes the Bridgerton family dramas seem tame by comparison. Before the Regency era became synonymous with empire waist dresses and scandalous courtships, it was born from a genuine crisis. In 1788, King George III of Great Britain began exhibiting bizarre behavior that would eventually remove him from power and reshape the monarchy. George was born in 1738, the first Hanoverian monarch actually born in England. At 22, he became king of a growing empire, and unlike many royals we've covered on this channel, he started off as a surprisingly dedicated ruler. He married Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz and fathered 15 children, including the future Prince Regent who would later inspire all those Regency romance novels you can't put down. For most of his early reign, George was known for a simple taste, his devotion to agriculture, earning him the nickname Farmer George, and his stubborn belief in royal authority, something that would cost him dearly during the American Revolution. But behind the scenes of his seemingly stable domestic life, something sinister was brewing. The first documented episode of the King's madness struck in the summer of 1788. At age 50, George suddenly began speaking rapidly, sometimes for hours without pause. His topics would veer wildly from religion to astronomy, often becoming incoherent. According to courtiers, the king's personality transformed overnight. The once reserved monarch became inappropriately familiar with courtiers. He would shake hands vigorously with trees, believing them to be Prussian soldiers. During a public appearance one time, he reportedly addressed an oak tree as if it were the King of Prussia, carrying on a lengthy conversation while horrified nobles looked on. In November, his condition had deteriorated dramatically. The king's urine turned blue, a detail that would become crucial to our mystery later. He suffered from agonizing abdominal pain, constipation, and insomnia. Most alarming to the court, he began experiencing hallucinations and delusions. Royal physicians were summoned, led by the king's trusted doctor, Sir George Baker. Their treatments, let me warn you, they were nothing short of medieval torture disguised as medicine. The king was subjected to blistering of the skin with caustic compounds, cupping and bloodletting to balance the humors, emetics to induce vomiting, purgatives causing severe diarrhea, ice baths and cold water dousing. And when these gentle approaches failed, Dr. Francis Willis, a clergyman turned physician who ran a private asylum, was called in. Willis's methods were even more extreme. The king, remember the most powerful man in the empire, was placed in a straitjacket. He was physically restrained in chairs bolted to the floor. If he refused food, he was force-fed. Willis believed in the breaking of patience through intimidation and punishment. Witnesses reported the king being beaten into submission. In his more lucid moments, George pleaded for mercy, begging to be freed from what he called the cruel hands of strangers. Parliament faced an unprecedented crisis. The king was clearly incapacitated, but no legal mechanism existed for transferring power yet. The Whig opposition, led by Charles James Fox, pushed for the appointment of the king's eldest son, the Prince of Wales, as regent, knowing the prince favored their party. The king's supporters, led by Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, desperately stalled. They claimed George would recover and accused the Whigs of political opportunism. This bitter struggle came to be known as the Regency Crisis, exposed the vulnerability at the heart of the monarchy. In February 1789, just as Parliament was about to pass the Regency Bill, George experienced a sudden recovery. The Whigs were absolutely devastated. Pitt maintained power, and the king returned to his duties, but this remission was only temporary. For decades, historians and physicians have debated the true nature of King George's malady. Most 18th century doctors diagnosed him with madness or melancholia, catch-all terms for mental illness. Prevailing theory for nearly 2 centuries was that George suffered from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But here's where the mystery deepens. In the 1970s, researchers examining hundreds of the king's letters noted peculiar changes during his episodes. His handwriting became frantic and erratic. His sentences ran on without punctuation, and most tellingly, his papers contained unusual repetitions of phrases, a linguistic pattern more consistent with neurological disorders than psychiatric ones. The turning point came when British psychiatrist Ida McAlpine reviewed the detailed medical records kept by the king's physicians. One symptom stood out: the king's urine turning purplish blue. This, combined with his abdominal pain, constipation, and neurological symptoms, pointed to a completely different diagnosis: porphyria. Porphyria is a group of rare inherited disorders affecting the production of heme, component of blood. The specific type George likely had, acute intermittent porphyria, causes the buildup of toxins that can attack the nervous system. Modern testing of George's hair samples found high levels of arsenic, which can trigger porphyria attacks. But here's the truly scandalous part: many of the treatments administered by his doctors would have dramatically worsened his condition. The emetics contained antimony, which exacerbates porphyria. The calming medicines were laced with arsenic compounds. Either through ignorance or malice, his doctors were essentially poisoning their own king. Some historians have gone even further, suggesting a darker conspiracy. The Prince of Wales and his Whig allies stood to gain enormously from the king's incapacity. While there's no smoking gun proving they influenced the medical treatment in any way, they certainly exploited the situation politically. DNA analysis of George's descendants revealed porphyria in several royal lines, leading credence to this biological explanation. Yet recent scholarship has challenged this diagnosis, suggesting that bipolar disorder with psychotic features might better explain some of the symptoms. What's undeniable is that George's treatment was influenced as much by politics as by medicine. His doctors were not neutral scientists, they were political appointees serving competing interests. George recovered from his first major episode and ruled effectively for another 2 decades, but in 1801 the illness returned with greater force. By 1810, after the heartbreaking death of his youngest daughter, Princess Amelia, George suffered his final and most severe breakdown. This time, there would be no recovery. The Regency Act of 1811 finally established his son as Prince Regent. George III, once the commanding ruler of a global empire, was confined to Windsor Castle. Witnesses described a pitiful figure, an elderly man with a long white beard, wandering the corridors in a purple dressing gown, having animated conversations with long-dead monarchs. In his more lucid moments, he played Handel's music on the harpsichord or gazed out windows at gardens he was no longer permitted to visit. He became completely blind and increasingly deaf. His keepers reported that he would hold conversations with himself, sometimes taking on different voices to play both parts. The final indignity came when the king no longer recognized his own family. When Queen Charlotte visited for the last time before her death in 1818, George reportedly treated her as a stranger. His son, the Prince Regent, rarely visited, preferring to enjoy his newfound power from a safe distance. On January 29, 1820, after nearly a decade of isolation, George III died at Windsor Castle at the age of 81. According to his doctor, his last coherent words were asking about the weather. George III's madness transformed the British monarchy forever. The Regency period that followed, with its distinctive architecture, fashion, and social customs, emerged directly from his illness. His son's extravagant reign set the stage for the Victorian monarchy that would follow. Medically, George's case represents one of history's most consequential misdiagnoses. If he indeed suffered from porphyria, a proper treatment could have prevented decades of suffering. Instead, the cures administered likely hastened his decline. Perhaps most tragically, George's story illustrates how easily medical conditions can be weaponized for political gain. His symptoms were exploited by opportunistic politicians and sensationalized by a partisan press. The king was reduced to a caricature, Mad King George, a simplification that persists to this very day. Modern portrayals like The Madness of King George have helped rehabilitate his image, presenting him as a victim rather than an object of ridicule. But the damage to his legacy was already done. A monarch who had ruled for nearly 60 years, longer than any British king before him, is remembered primarily for his illness rather than his accomplishments. In the glittering world portrayed in period dramas, the aristocracy danced at balls and pursued courtships under the approval of the ton. But the real Regency began with a medical mystery and potential conspiracy that changed the course of British history. The true crime here wasn't committed by the king, but against him, by doctors who harmed rather than healed, and by a system unprepared to protect its sovereign when he was at his most vulnerable. What do you think about George's condition? Was it porphyria, bipolar disorder, or something else entirely? Do you believe there was a conspiracy to keep him incapacitated? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this royal medical mystery, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Crimes of the Crown for more tales of royal intrigue, scandal, and deception. Next week, we'll be exploring the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of a certain Russian royal that make the Tun's gossip pale in comparison. Until then, remember that behind every crown lies a crime waiting to be uncovered.